Hey guys, it's Trevor here with Reading Time with Parker and Trevor. So today we're going to be reading Hatchet by Gary Paulson again. So if you missed our last episode, or chapter, it was chapter 8. So you can go back and watch that, or you can listen to my little review. So basically, Brian was in his shelter at night and had an encounter with a porcupine that actually pricked him in his leg. So he had to pull the quills out. But then his big discovery was he discovered that he could make fire from slashing his hatchet on rock. So we all know that. But he figured that one out, so that was the big discovery. So now he is ready to figure out and make a fire for himself to keep warm and make food. So let's figure out in chapter 9 what he's going to do. So Brian found out it was very long way from sparks to fire. Clearly, there had been something for the sparks to ignite, some kind of tinder or kindling. But what? He brought some dried grass in, tapped sparks into it, and watched them die. He tried small twigs, breaking them into little pieces, but that was worse than the grass. Then he tried a combination of the two, grass and twigs. Nothing. He had no trouble getting sparks, but the tiny bits of hot stone or metal, he couldn't tell which they were, just sputtered and died. He settled back on his haunches in exasperation, looking at the pitiful clump of grass and twigs. He needed something finer, something soft and fine and fluffy to catch the bits of fire. Shredded paper would be nice, but he had no paper. So close, he said aloud, so close. He put the hatchet back into his belt and went out of the shelter, limping on his sore leg. There had to be something. Had to be. Man had made fire. There had been fire for thousands, millions of years. There had to be a way. He dug into his pockets and found the $20 bill in his wallet. Paper, worthless paper out here, but he could get a fire going. He ripped the 20 into pieces, made a pile of pieces, and hit the sparks into them. Nothing happened. They just wouldn't take the sparks, but there had to be a way, some way to do it. Not 20 feet to his right, leaning out over the water, were birches, and he stood looking at them for a full half minute before they registered on his mind. They were beautiful white with bark like clean, slightly speckled paper. Paper! He moved to the trees, where the bark was peeling, and the trunks lifted in tiny trindles, almost fluffs. Brian plucked some of them loose, rolled them into his fingers. They seemed flammable, dry, and nearly powdery. He pulled and twisted bits off the trees, packing them in one hand while he picked them with the other, picking and gathering until had a wad close to the size of a baseball. Then he went back into the shelter and arranged the ball of birch bark peelings at the base of the black rock. As an afterthought, he threw them in the remains of the $20 bill. He struck, and a stream of sparks fell into the bark and quickly died. But this time, one spark fell on one small hair of dry bark, almost a thread of bark, and seemed to glow a bit brighter before it died. The material had to be finer. There had to be a soft and incredibly fine nest for the sparks. I made a home for the sparks, he thought, a perfect home, or they won't stay. They won't make a fire. He started ripping the bark using his fingernails at first, and that didn't work. He used the sharp edge of the hatchet, cutting the bark into thin slivers, hairs so fine that they were almost not there. It was painstaking work, slow work, and he stayed with it for over 2 hours. Twice he stopped for a handful of berries and once go to the lake for a drink. Then back to work, the sun on his back until at least he had a ball of fluff as big as a grapefruit, dry birchbark fluff. He positioned his spark nest as he thought of it at the base of the rock, used his thumbs to make a small depression into the middle, and slammed the back of the hatchet across the black rock. A cloud of sparks raised down, but most of them missing the nest. But some, perhaps thirsty or so, hid in the depression, and those of 6 or 7 found fuel and grew smothered and caused the bark to take on the red glow. Then they went out. Close, he was close. He repositioned the nest, made a new and smaller dent with his thumb, and struck it again. More sparks, a slight glow, then nothing. It's me, he thought. I'm doing something wrong. I do not know that this. A cave dweller would have done a fire by now. A Cro-Magnon man would have a fire by now. But I don't know this. I don't know how to make a fire. Maybe not enough sparks. He settled the nest in place once more and hit the rocks with a series of blows as fast as he could. The sparks poured like a golden waterfall. As they first seemed to take, there were many sparks that found life and took briefly, but then they died, starved. He leaned back. They are like me. They are starved. It wasn't quantity. There were plenty of sparks. They needed more. I would kill, he thought suddenly, for a book of matches. Just one book. Just one match I would kill. What makes fire? He thought back to school, to all those science classes he had ever learned what to make a fire. Did a teacher ever stand up there and say, "This is what makes a fire"? He shook his head, tried to focus on his thoughts. What did it take? You have to have fuel, he thought, and then he had that. The bark was fuel. Oxygen. There had to be air. He needed to add air. He had to fan on it, blow on it. He made the nest ready again, held the hatchet backwards, tensed and struck 4 quick blows. Sparks came down and he leaned towards as fast as he could and blew. Too hard. There was a bright, almost intense glow, and then it was gone. He had blown it out. Another set of strikes, more sparks. He leaned and blew, but gently this time, holding back and aiming the stream of air from his mouth to hit the brightest spot. 5 or 6 sparks had fallen in a tight mass of bark hair, and Brian centered his efforts there. Sparks grew with the gentle breath. The red glow moved from the sparks themselves into bark. Moved and grew because worms, glowing red worms that crawled up the bark hairs and caught other shreds of bark and grew until there was a pocket of red as big as a quarter, a glowing red coat of heat. When he ran out of breath and to pause, the red ball suddenly burst into flames. "Fire!" he yelled. "I've got fire! I've got it! I've got it! I've got it!" But the flames were thick and oily and burning fast, consuming the ball of bark as fast as if it was gasoline. He had to feed the flames, keep them going, working as fast as he could, carefully place the dry grass and wood pieces as he tried on the first top. At first on top of the bark, and was gratified to see them take. But they would go fast. He needed more and more. He could not let the flames go out. He ran from the shelter to the pines and started breaking off low, dead, small limbs. There he grew, threw into the shelter, went back for more, threw those in, and squatted to break the feed the hungry flames. When the small wood was going well, he went out and found larger wood and did not relax until that was going. Then he leaned back against the wood to brace the door of his door opening and smiled. I have a friend, he thought. I have a friend now. A hungry fire, but a good one. I have a friend named Fire. Hello, Fire. The curve of the rock back made an almost perfect drawing flue that carried the smoke up through the cracks of the roof, but held the heat. If he kept the fire small, it would be perfect and would keep anything like the porcupine from coming through the door again. A friend and a guard, he thought. So much from a little spark. A friend and a guard from a tiny spark. He looked around and wished he had somebody to tell this thing, to show this thing he had done, but there was nobody. Nothing but trees in the sun and the breeze in the lake. Nobody. And he thought, rolling thoughts with the smoke curling up over his head and the smile still half on his face, he thought, I wonder what they're doing now. I wonder what my father's doing. And my mother. I wonder if she is with him. So, that was the end of chapter 9. So we had some pretty interesting stuff happen in that chapter. Brian actually figured out how to make his fire slow but steady. There were different objects and obstacles he had to face, but he finally got it. And then we'll see what he does with his fire. He now has a friend, as he calls it, in his fire. So he's starting to get adapted to the wilderness and wildlife. But we're excited for chapter 10, so make sure to check that one out next episode. But other than that, have a good day.